Today we're answering the age-old question, should you buy or should you rent? Thanks for tuning back in, guys. Today, as mentioned before, we're talking about the pros and cons of renting versus owning. Now, this topic has been covered to death on YouTube, but I feel like a lot of people have got it wrong and missed some major factors that I think need to come into consideration when you are considering renting versus home owning. Now, first of all, I want to start off with there is some big pros to renting. Now, firstly, if you are living somewhere for a short period of time, you might only be there for a year, it is definitely worth considering renting as a very viable option. Obviously, if you are looking at buying and then selling in a short period of time, you will spend quite a fair bit of money on the expenses that are incurred when you buy and sell real estate. So if you're only going to be somewhere for a short period of time, I highly recommend renting. The other option that needs consideration in this video is that every area is different. Some areas it is a lot cheaper to rent than it is to buy. Typically these areas are the areas that see high capital growth. There's a lot of investors in the market, and renting property is a lot cheaper than owning property. So that's something else that's worth taking into consideration for your circumstances. Now, to the pros of home ownership. The first and biggest pro that I see about owning your own home is the security of knowing that it's your property and that no one can kick you out unless you fail to pay the mortgage if there's a loan on the property. So if you own a house or own your own home, you have control over that property. Now, this is a big factor if you've got a family and don't want to have to shift, or if you're coming into retirement age and you're thinking about when you're 70, 80, 90, you don't want to be getting older in life and have to be kicked out because the landlord decides they want to sell the property. Well, at least if you own the property, it's in your control. Also with this, if you want to change something, if you want to put a new kitchen in, if you want to paint a wall, you don't need to ask permission if it's your property. So that's the biggest positive I see of home ownership. The second massive positive that's often missed in videos talking about this topic is the fact that if you do have a home loan, you're essentially being forced to save money and being forced to pay off the loan if that loan's on a 30-year or a 20-year term. So this is a massive advantage. So if you were to buy a property today and bought it on a 30-year fixed home loan, you will have to pay off that property over a 30-year window. So each week you're going to be paying down that loan, which is essentially forced savings in my book. Eventually you will get to a day where you own that property outright and have $400, $500, $1 million in equity thanks to being forced to pay off that property. Now, you could argue that you could take those savings and put them into the stock market, but let's be honest, 99.9% of the population would rather go buy a boat or a jet ski or go on a fancy holiday to Europe. Most people in general are not good savers. So that's where buying your own home and forcing yourself to pay it off over a 30-year window will be very beneficial over saying, I will put money back into the stock market. Let's be real, most people are not going to be that self-disciplined. The third huge advantage to owning your own home, and particularly in Australia, is your home is a tax-free asset. So that means if your property doubles in value over a 20-year period and you sell the property, the proceeds of that sale are tax-free in Australia. So this is a huge advantage. Most properties do go up in general. I believe it's been recorded 3 to 4% per annum. Don't quote me on that. But in general, most people will agree that property will go up in value over time. So if you own your own home and you sell it 20 years on, 10 years later, 5 years later, the profits from that sale are tax-free. Now, your home's about one of the only assets in Australia that if it does go up in value, you can sell tax-free. So that is a huge advantage. The last factor that I want to discuss is inflation. Now, if you're renting a property, there's an extremely high chance that every year your rent's going to go up a little bit by a little bit by a little bit. So if you're renting a property today for $400 a week, there's a very high chance that in 10 years' time, that property will be renting for $500 per week. Where on the flip side of this, if you bought your own home and you bought it on a mortgage, the chances are interest rates are going to stay pretty steady into the future. So your repayments, the cost of owning that home, are actually going to stay the same over that 10, 20 or 30 year window. So you're not going to have to be paying more money than what you are on day one, Where renting 10 years into the future, there's a very high chance you're going to be paying an increased rent on what you are today. Finally, there's a massive advantage to home ownership, and that is when you actually own the home outright and the bank's no longer involved. So this is something that you'll just never achieve when you're renting. You'll always have to pay rent right up until the day you die, where if you own your home outright, you will get to a point where that property will be paid off and you no longer will have to pay anything towards owning that home except council rates and insurance, which are pretty negligible in the scheme of things. So that is a massive advantage that really I encourage people to look at home ownership, is because you will one day own that asset outright. Now, as always guys, this isn't personal financial advice. This is general in nature. It's here for entertainment, and I hope I have entertained. So if you have enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, make sure you subscribe. And one last thing about home ownership. If you do own your own home, you will, if you want, be able to have chickens. It's a positive.